So it's now 10:02, so I think we'll get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Laura Hodgkiss, and I'm the Event and Training Team Leader here at Staffordshire Chamber of Commerce. We're joined today by Catriona Hudson, who's going to be doing our webinar this morning, Leading Through the Change Curve, Being Human, which we're very excited to have her with us. Just for those of you that are not used to the Zoom platform, so we cannot see or hear you today, so the only way that you can communicate with us is via the chat function at the bottom of your screen and the Q&A section as well. But I would ask if you wouldn't mind just leaving the questions right till the very end, so that the speaker can get through the questions as quickly as possible, but feel free to send anything across via the chat the whole way through the presentation. So Catriona, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. And thanks to Staffordshire Chambers of Commerce for inviting me to speak to you today. This is very lovely, I have to say. I guess it's not entirely surprising that for those leaders amongst you that the subject of understanding and leading change is perhaps prevalent and at the forefront of your mind. So I'm delighted to be here today to be able to talk you through some of that and how you might lead effectively during these unprecedented times that we're facing at the moment. So before I get started, maybe a little bit about me, so that you can say, well, why is she qualified to even talk to us about this? My name's Catriona Hudson, and I now run my own consultancy business where I cover a range of topics, really, a range of disciplines. The first thing I do, or one of the things I do, I'm in the enviable position of working for a gentleman called Paul McGee, who's affectionately known as the Sumo Guy, and some of you may know his work. Sumo standing for Shut Up, Move On, or in these more delicate times, Stop, Understand, Move On. And I work for him as a motivational speaker and travel all over the place delivering some of his lovely material around change, resilience, mindfulness, well-being, etc. And indeed, that's where I met Staffordshire Chamber of Commerce, where they heard me speak at an event probably about 2 years ago now. In addition to motivational speaking, I'm a coach. I do leadership development, and my specialism is very much in organisational development, transformation, change. Over the past 15 years, I've held senior leadership positions, and sort of a job ago, I was a deputy chief executive in a large housing association, and more recently worked as a senior OD professional for a large local authority. Back in the day, I started off as a professional actress and singer. And as an actress and singer, I was a great waitress, so then went into the world of leadership. Sounded like a good idea at the time. So I guess what my background tells us is that from day one, I've been interested in people, and I've been interested in how I tick and how other people tick, and how to get the best out of myself in order to get the best out of others. As an actress, you need to know your character. As a leader, you need to know your staff and how to get the best out of them. And when I do my sumo seminars, one of the analogies we use is around an oxygen mask, and about actually, as a leader, you have to get the best out of yourself in order to get the best out of others and the best out of life. And the oxygen mask analogy is when you go on holiday, if you can remember that far back, when the flight people are doing the announcements, they talk about if there's a decrease in cabin pressure, the oxygen masks falling from the ceiling, and then they tell you to put your own mask on first. Why? Because you're no good if you're dead, are you? And the same applies in leadership. You've got to put your own oxygen mask on first to make sure you breathe life into yourself in order then to be the best leader that you can be for your staff and your teams. So that's a little bit about me and why maybe I'm qualified to talk a little bit about change. So this webinar, or our Up Close and Personal, aims to have three key messages really that I'd like to be ringing in your ears as you perhaps leave today. The first one is you're being human. Whatever you're experiencing and whatever thoughts and feelings you and your staff are experiencing, they're completely normal. You know, and during my training sessions, I sometimes talk about how the brain works and the three parts to our brain. And I talk about the reptilian brain, sometimes known as the monkey brain, the human emotional brain that deals with emotion and language, and then the third, neocortex, our intelligent, our computer brain that deals with logic. During these unprecedented times, when people are experiencing fear and panic and uncertainty, the monkey brain, the reptilian brain, is often the one in the room. And that's why people are maybe reacting in strange and wondrous ways. You're being human. Phew. The second message for today is around, in addition to understanding the thoughts and feelings that are going on, maybe recognizing that we're also going through a process. And I don't know about you, but as a kid, I was one of these kids who, if I had an alarm clock, I'd have to take it apart and put it back together again to know how it worked. And I'm a bit like that about change as well. If I can understand what's going on and the process and the mechanics of it, I'm much more likely to be able to choose my response and know what to do about it. And I think that's the same for leadership. Let us understand so then we know what to do. And the third message, and probably the most important actually, it's okay to not be okay. These are unprecedented times, and people will be feeling and expressing all kinds of things, from real fear to complete euphoria. And that's okay. It's okay to understand that you're not okay, and to sit with that and to process that, and then to decide what to do. So as leaders, you need to recognize that you're going through all this as well. And sometimes you'll not be okay, and to just sit with that and allow it to process, and then decide what to do. You're human. You're not perfect. It's okay. So I think it's fair to say in the last month or so, it's all gone a bit weird, hasn't it, really? Our lives are kind of unrecognisable from where they were perhaps just a month ago. For some of you, or most of you, you're learning how to work from home during a crisis. And I'm very deliberate about what I said there. You're learning to work from home during a crisis. This is not the same as standard working from home. I work from home all the time. This feels different. So for those of you who are thinking about in the future asking people to work from home more because you know how to do it now, there is something about how you might want to land that slightly differently, because this isn't how it normally feels, although the technology clearly works. For some of you, and indeed like myself, work will have gone. You know, my business is the business of people. For my business to work, I have to be in a room with somebody. My calendar's cleared. I'm confident things are going to come back online, but I don't necessarily know when. For some of you, in addition to doing your work, you're having to do homeschooling, which sounds like a nightmare, I have to say, and I'm glad that's not the position I'm in. Others will be worrying about money, and of course, most, if not all of us, will be thinking about our health and the health of our families, some of whom we can't even see at the moment. Now, I don't know about you, but during this pandemic, I have listened to the news to get some information. Now, I have restricted the amount of news that I listen to, because I recognise I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, and also if I keep binging on all this doom and gloom, I'm not really helping my mental diet. And if I'm binging on a lot of doom and gloom and scaremongering, I'm going to be feeding that monkey brain. So I need to just manage the amount of information I take on. But with the pandemic, recognising I'm not a doctor, what I've chosen to do is listen to the experts, take their advice, choose what to do about it. And I think we need to maybe apply the same logic when thinking about our thinking. You know, think, what is the feelings that I'm having? Think about the thought that triggered those feelings. Sit with that and choose what to do about it. Because as it says on my slide, don't believe everything you think. And for you and your staff at the moment, some of the thinking will be really disturbing perhaps, and just a little bit faulty. And just because the thoughts are there doesn't make it true. Thoughts come in, thoughts go out. Understand the thinking that drives the feeling, sit with it, recognize it, choose what to do. In addition to the thinking and the feeling that's going on, it's also good to know that we're actually going through a process. And as I said earlier, for me, being able to take things apart and put them back together again is really, really useful. So I want to introduce you to a rather splendid lady called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Now, for some of you, you'll be thinking, hang on, I've come across this before. This is as old as the hills. And sometimes the old stuff, you know, it has a habit of coming back. And certainly for me over the last few weeks and months, whilst I've been thinking about the thinking, it has also become starkly apparent to me that we are in fact going through the Kubler-Ross process. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, for those of you who don't know her, did her main research in the 1960s when she wrote a book called Of Death and Dying, which sounds cheery. But she, at that time, was working with terminally ill patients. And what she found in her research was that when people were facing their own mortality, they tended to go through 5 distinct phases called the grief cycle. And indeed, the people surrounding those facing their own mortality, who were about to experience bereavement, also went through the same 5 stages. Later on in her research, Kubler-Ross discovered that actually, as human beings, when we experience any kind of major change, which obviously your mortality is, but any kind of change, they go through these same 5 stages. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that what I'm experiencing today or what you're experiencing today is the same as experiencing your impending mortality. As I sit here in Worcestershire now, I can hear the lambs bleating. It's not as bad as that. But nevertheless, the phases that we go through are similar. Now, you'd think, given that I teach this kind of stuff and talk about change and talk about resilience and how we think and mindfulness, you would think that during the pandemic, somebody like me would have just smashed it because I understand how all this stuff works, right? Well, you'd be wrong. You know, I've had some pretty interesting thoughts, and I have certainly been all over the change curve, because even me, someone like me, you know, can get it wrong. I can get all a bit Norma Desmond about it and all very dramatic, because I'm human. And to be human means to be imperfect, and to be human means to have thoughts and feelings. So I think it's really useful for us to understand what processes it we're going through, and as leaders understand what is it we need to do to help ourselves in order then to help others, and what might others need. So let's have a look at the change curve. And for some of you, this might be familiar. It's something perhaps you've come across before. There are different versions of this change curve, and if you go and Google it later, you will see some of those different versions. I've deliberately chosen this version. The original Kubler-Ross version separated anger and bargaining, and those were the 5 stages, and it didn't talk about integration. But because I'm talking to leaders today, I thought it would be useful to bring the version in which does mention integration, because for some of you, you will already be thinking and planning about what happens next when we get through all this. What are the plans going to be then? So I thought it might be useful to cover some of that today. So you'll notice there are the 5 stages. You'll notice an axis that talks about energy or levels of motivation, energy being high or energy being low. And then the axis along the bottom is around is time, is over time. And there are 3 distinct phases. So I'll take you through those phases now. It's going to be a gallop through because I'm conscious we only have an hour, so it will be a gallop through. So get your pens and pencils ready. And if this is recorded later, maybe rewind a little bit as well and just check some of what I'm saying. So phase 1 then is shock and denial. And you'll see on the chart that the energy during shock and denial actually increases. Sometimes shock, it decreases a bit and then goes up, but on our graph it's showing that the increase, the energy goes up. And that's because in shock and denial, in shock, the reptilian brain has come into the room and you're ready to fight or flight. So the energy is there. And in denial, well, you're in denial. So, happy days, everything's okay. Shock can be short-lived. And during that fight or flight shock stage, your reptilian brain is looking for the data. It needs to know, do I have to fight, flight, freeze, or submit? What is it I need to do? So it's going to be looking for the data. So if you have it, give it. In the pandemic, if we think back a few weeks, I think we can probably reflect back and see that shock stage was definitely there. When word was coming from Wuhan, people were panicking. What is this about? What is happening to me? What are the rules? People were looking for. We're in supermarkets, elbowing each other out of the way. There was all kinds of stuff going on. During denial, again, the energy stays high because, well, change isn't going to happen, is it? It won't affect me. And I think if we think about, again, the pandemic and what was happening a few weeks ago, we could definitely see evidence of denial. So just before the lockdown on that Monday, if you remember, there was a lovely bank holiday weekend. We'd had all the news from Italy that people were dying in their thousands. We had a bank holiday weekend. People were on the beach. They were in denial. They were thinking that this won't happen to us, or if it does, they'll have a plan. There'll be a cure by then. We'll be okay. So what's the leadership challenge for you during shock and denial? Well, I think going back to that oxygen mask analogy, you've got to recognise you may be feeling this as well. You might be feeling slight paralysis yourself. So look after yourself first, get the data that you need, get the information. Through all these phases, communication is absolutely key. But during shock and denial, the communication needs to be directive and needs to be really simple, reiterating what is going on, providing as much reassurance as you can, but keeping it simple. If you've got credible data, give it out. If you don't know, say you don't know, but reinforce the messages regularly and provide additional support, recognizing that people's reptilian brains are in the room, so they probably aren't being very logical at all. And if you remember back a few weeks, this messaging from the government was really simple, wasn't it? Stay at home, wash your hands, protect the NHS, that kind of stuff. So moving on to the next stage then, which is anger and bargaining. So in anger, we take a bit of a dive really, because we've been feeling okay, we've been in denial, we take a bit of a plummet, and you will see people's behaviour change quite starkly during this period. At this time, people start to look for a scapegoat. They look for somebody to blame for the change that they're going through. It's an outrage. It's not fair. Why is this happening to me? And again, thinking about the pandemic, we've definitely seen and are still seeing some of that anger and bargaining playing out now. So I watched the footage last week, for example, on Westminster Bridge, where we had all the blue lights were out and there were people on the bridge clapping and being just wonderfully supportive towards our NHS colleagues. And the vigilantism then kicked in. So as you scrolled through the messaging on Twitter or wherever, you could see that vigilantism. Look at them on that bridge. Well, they can't be that busy, can they? They're not even stood 2 meters apart. It's their fault this pandemic's spreading. They'll all be in hospital next week. So in that anger stage, it can get quite nasty. And if you look at what's happening over the pond in America, we've got protests, people fighting for their right to be ill. At this time, people often talk about bargaining, and we're certainly seeing that in America. But over here, it would be, well, all right, I get that we've got to stay indoors, but what if B&Q opened? Would that still be all right? And what if my local chippy opened? Would I be, and I need my roots doing? What about my hairdresser? So all this kind of bargaining starts to take place. It's completely normal. So for you as leaders during this anger and bargaining stage, how might you need to prepare your communication at that time? I think one of the most important things is to accept as leaders that during this time, people's performance levels are going to start to dip, and to give them reassurance that you know that too, because the anger will be at sometimes for you based on their performance. How can you expect me to do this when I'm homeschooling? So let them know that you recognise that maybe the performance isn't going to be where it should be. Make sure your messaging is clear and consistent, and be ready to answer questions, and some pretty snarky questions at that. So as a leadership cadre, be on message, be clear, stick to the mantra. If you have got any simple plans that you can share at this stage to give reassurance, by all means do that. That might, dissipate some of that anger. But accept that the reptilian brain is still in the room and the logical brain is out for lunch. So again, don't get frustrated if what you're getting back is incongruent to what you've pushed out. People are just going through a process. Hold your nerve, keep going. From anger and bargaining, we then go to the bottom of our change curve, and that is when we hit the point called depression. And I'm very careful about using that word because it has certain connotations, and I'm certainly, in this context, I'm not talking about clinical depression here, although clearly for some people that will be the reality. I'm talking about that depression when the reality hits and you're at your lowest ebb and you're perhaps feeling hopeless or isolated or really, really low. During depression, when I'm doing my sumo seminars, this is when I would talk about hippo time. And hippo time is because what do hippos love to do? They love to get in a mud pool and have a good wallow. And hippo time is really, really useful because when we're wallowing in our mud pool of misery, we're doing that as part of our recovery, and it is necessary. It is important for the human spirit to be able to sit and process. And that's what depression and hippo time allows us to do, because it is okay to not be okay. It is part of the process and you have to experience it. But it is temporary, because like all great hippo pools, they can be sticky and you can get stuck. So be careful who you wallow with. There are professional wallowers out there. And be careful of what you're feeding your mental diet during this time of depression. Listening to some random woman on Facebook telling you we're all going to die will not help you right now. It's okay to be okay, to not be okay, but think about who you wallow with and how you might get out of the other side. But this is about recovery. It is a really important part of this curve. So the leadership challenge here is this is where you have to change your tack. Previously, we've been quite simple and directive in order to get through to that reptilian brain. The logical brain is now starting to come back in the room. So now people need that time to be held and to be comforted and to be reassured. Letting them know that they're not alone and that other people feel this too can be helpful. But there is a health warning with that. If somebody says to you, I'm feeling really low today, and you felt really low yesterday, whilst it's helpful to say, yeah, I feel low sometimes too, what isn't helpful is for you then to tell them your story, your experience, because it's so unique to everybody. It's not the same. Even if you've both felt low, It's not the same. It's never the same. So give them space and listen, and use more coaching, non-directive questionings. Regular one-to-ones, accept that they'll be going through the motions right now, offer them extra support, share plans if you feel it's helpful to do so and they can take it on board. But listen, listen, listen. Following depression, the new lights of optimism and enthusiasm start to appear, and we go into the stage of acceptance, and you'll see our motivational levels are starting to rise. This is because individuals are now accepting that change is inevitable, that this is for real, and they begin to work with the change rather than against it. And for a lot of people, that's probably where they're finding themselves now. I know that's certainly where I am. I mean, I'm doing a webinar today, so I'm accepting some of the changes, right, and getting on board. So in the pandemic, I think we're also hearing some of that rhetoric now globally. So you'll hear acceptance rhetoric around things like people saying things like, this is a real opportunity for us to learn. You know, we've been destroying our planet, and nature is now reclaiming parts of our planet. You know, there's dolphins down the Grand Canal in Venice. What's the learning from this? How do we want to be in the new world? And if we don't make changes, then it's all been for nothing, hasn't it? So that rhetoric is already starting to play out, and that's great because there's energy there, and as leaders we can start to work with that energy. So the thoughts and feelings during acceptance will be around exciting new opportunities, a relief that we've survived it, and an impatience to now crack on and get on with it, which for you as leaders is great news if you're ready. So for you leaders now, it's an opportunity to start sharing your plans, giving those regular briefings and focusing on the future. But more importantly than that, it's about getting people on board and involved. So if you haven't got your plans ready to do that yet, start to get them now, because once people come out the other side, they're full of energy, they want to crack on. If you're not ready, there's a chance they'll slip back. So think about those opportunities for webinars, for co-production, for engagement, for giving them tasks, give them responsibility, lessons learned, that kind of thing. Start to prepare for that now if you haven't done so already. And then finally, we end up in the lovely world of integration. And that's when the new change is the new normal. And we're hearing that already, the new normal. What's the new normal going to be? For each and every one of you in your organizations, that will be different. But what you will have is people who will be accepting and trusting of that new change. And I guess in terms of the pandemic and globally, that will be interesting to see how that pans out. I think there's going to be something about circle of influence, circle of control at this stage, because I suspect there will be some things we can't control and will be enforced upon us. So we might think about some of the economic challenges. I suspect there'll be loads of hairy, scary things around that will come out, which we'll just have to live with. But lots of other things may be up for grabs. And I guess in the context of your organisation, for those people you're trying to keep with you and keep on the right side of the curve, it's thinking about what are those things that are up for grabs that we can give them to grab hold of. So at this stage, again, sharing processes and sharing the progress about the plans so far, maybe some opportunities to think about some of those early successes and those quick wins that you had at acceptance phase, and making sure that people kind of build on the success for that. Lots of reassurance that the vision is achievable, you're on the right track, this is where we're headed, lots of progress reports, etc. And again, building on that energy, because you can see the energy is at its highest now. So, you know, ride the crest of that wave if you can. Because if you're not ready at this stage, there is a warning here that if you're not ready to give people and involve people at that stage, then there is a really good chance that they're going to slide back into even shock and denial that you haven't been ready. And then you're back at the negative side of that curve again. So get ready, I guess, would be the key message for leaders now. So remembering then, just to kind of summarize, every person is going through their own unique journey at the moment, even though we're having a collective experience. I heard a lovely analogy the other day. We're all in the same storm, but we're in a different boat. And some boats are better equipped than others, I guess. So everybody will experience the Kubler-Ross change in a range of ways, but it's useful to know that we're going through a process. That said, it's not linear. You know, it would be great to think, wouldn't it, that we just start at shock and whiz our way through to acceptance and jobs are good. And it doesn't really work like that. And I think the diagram on the screen kind of beautifully illustrates how it's felt for me. So it's not linear. People won't be going through it at the same time. You'll have various staff at various levels. So you need to think about how you communicate and how you engage with them, given whichever level they're at. But whatever point you are at, or your staff are at, it's normal. You know, they're not being weird. They're not being deliberately unhelpful. They're not being obstructive. It's normal. It's just what humans do. So I think there can be some comfort in that. You're going through it as well. And so there's something about recognizing what you need to do for yourself and putting your own oxygen mask on first, helping yourself before you can help others, before you can get the best out of the situation. So in summary then, you are being human. Your staff are being human. It's what we do. We are strange and wondrous creatures. Put your own oxygen mask on first, because you are going through a cycle of grief, a change and grief process. This is big stuff and it's happening en masse. So there is a kind of an energy around it that is perhaps unusual to what would normally happen in a change process. It's okay to not be okay. You know, don't beat yourself up. Don't beat the staff up. It's just how it is. And maybe sit with that and remember, you know, have a wallow, be a hippo, because this is about recovery and making sure you come out healthy on the other side. It's not about rushing. It's about, you know, doing the best that you can do. So with that in mind, communication, engagement is key. Compassion towards your staff is key, and compassion towards yourself is probably most important of all. So it is okay to not be okay, and it's even better to be human, even though that means sometimes we have to be imperfect, but maybe, you know, get some great learning along the way. So that was a massive, I don't even think it was a canter, I think it was probably a gallop through the Kubler-Ross change curve. So with that in mind now, I'm going to ask if there are any questions or feedback, and Laura will perhaps come in at this point and let me know if there's anything that anybody wishes to say. Thank you very much.
Hi. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. We're at the Q&A point, everyone. So if you have any questions, that would be fantastic. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to, here we go. Here, all the questions are coming in. That's good. Oh, it's just somebody saying thank you, which is lovely. Thank you, Clive.
Thank you.
So just wait a couple more minutes, because it does usually take a couple of minutes for the Q&A to get started.
People are perhaps a little bit sort of rabbit in the headlights, startled, because it was, you know, whiz, 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 whiz. Goodness me, what possible question could I have now?
It does take about a minute, believe it or not, to come through to the Q&A itself when people ask questions. So, and a minute doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're on a webinar, it's a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to take up. There's a lot to take in there, particularly about, you know, there's kind of two things going on. There's your own thinking and your own feelings, that is kind of a seminar in itself. And then there's the change curve as well. So there's kind of different things going on for people at the same time. So there's a lot to process, I think, at the moment.
Just ask again, just if anybody's got any questions, just at the Q&A at the bottom, so you will be able to ask questions just at the Q&A at the bottom. I'll just give it another minute or so, just in case anybody's got any questions. So you have got a sort of a compliment in the Q&A. So they just said you're too good to leave us in a position where we have questions to ask.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take that.
That's not a bad.
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
tried to cover. I think it's just difficult. I think because particularly for leaders, you're expected to be one step ahead of everybody else by some kind of divine intervention, and actually as leaders, you know, we're human too, and we're experiencing all that stuff too, and you're expected to support other people, and therefore it is a, you know, it is a different ask. It is a bigger ask for leaders, and I think that, you know, getting your plans ready and getting your communications ready and thinking about the different types of communication depending on where the person is at is always going to be really key during this time. But I guess getting ready for coming out of the curve, I suppose, is the most important bit of all, because once you're there, there's going to be an expectation that you're ready, and, you know, right, we're ready now, we're ready for you now, boss, so what's your plan? You know, so if you haven't got one, then get one. Really.
Absolutely, and I think that resonates with a lot of people. To be honest, I think that sort of, you're expected to be a level above. Well, actually, you're just going through the curve as much as everybody else is.
Yeah, and you're not alone. People have great ideas, and once their logical brain has entered the room again, and they're kind of coming into that out of depression and into that acceptance phase, they've got the energy, they've got the ideas, that they're there. So, you know, by goodness, use them. You know, because why do it all yourself? Use them. Let them come up with the ideas and get them as involved. And you're just going to have to be a bit creative how you do that now, because you're not going to be sat in front of them. So, you know, what kind of mediums like this can you be using and engaging people now, really, and starting to think about that and planning that, because I don't think we'll be back in our offices anytime soon, particularly.
No, which is, you know what, it's adapting, isn't it? It's adapting to new things. So yeah, but I've agreed.
It is different from normally working at home, because I said, even though as a consultant I work from home all the time, but this feels different even for me who works at home. So, you know, I think we've just got to be careful, because I'm hearing a lot of rhetoric now about, oh, people know how to work from home now. Doing agile working is going to be so easy. And I think, well, yeah, they technically know how to work from home, but it's been kind of done at a rush and imposed on them. So the mindset might not quite have been ready. So there's something about landing that working from home slightly differently in the future, I think, because some people could have some quite negative experiences, and this working from home in a pandemic is very different from just choosing to work from home because it's an agile thing to do.
Absolutely, completely agree. Sorry, we've got some, I don't think we've got any questions, but just people thanking you actually in the Q&A. Robert says, thank you for the supportive info, given that the lockdown has been for a few weeks. Some of us have gone through a lot of this stuff already. What's next? And glad you're talking about this. Probably more of a rhetorical question more than an actual physical question.
Yeah, but that's the leadership challenge, isn't it? The leadership challenge is the what next. That's what leaders are expected to know. You know, leaders are thinking 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years into the future. So, you know, that what next is going to be even more important. People will want reassurance that you've been thinking about it. So as a leadership cadre with your leadership colleagues, you should be starting to think, if you haven't already, what those new phases and those new contingencies will be, because once they come out of the depression change curve, they're going to want to know answers. So I would say that's where, as a leadership cadre, you're focusing your energy and efforts on now, whereas your communication efforts might still be in anger and depression stage. Your work efforts is in acceptance and integration, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave just says, it's good to know that I'm not alone going through this. So that's great. Paula just says, we are already planning for the return of our teams and clients. And I've been speaking to my team all the time to stay in touch. I think this is so important to them, how to get plans over and to whom. So it's a very good session today. Thank you. So she's just saying thank you there.
Oh, good. Yeah. But as I said, just remember, sometimes the logical brain is not in the room. And so, you sometimes hear in any kind of change program, leaders will say, how have they not got the message? I've done seminars, I've done briefings, I've done emails. They just don't get it. And you go, well, no, because they're in an emotional state. They're thinking about themselves and they're freaking out. And you can't take on information when you're freaking out. So you just have to be stalwart about it and just keep going back and keeping the messages as simple as you can. Stay at home, wash your hands, look after the NHS. 3 really simple messages.
Brilliant. Fantastic. I don't think we're going to get any questions. I think everybody sort of, anybody that wants to thank you and etc. things like that has done so. Thank you so much for that. It was so informative. So really appreciate you coming on today. For those of you that have attended today, thank you so much for attending. As you probably are already aware, we do have webinars all available on the Staffordshire Chamber of Commerce website. And if you did miss the beginning part of this, or you've missed some that have already been and gone, you can look at our webinar library, and that will be available on our platform as well. I just want to thank Catriona again for hosting the webinar today, and we look forward to seeing you all very shortly. Bye for now.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.